Hello, this is Cryptolyze. I hope you are well. This Sunday 26, November 2023. We are together today to talk about Grayscale Capital, to talk about GBTC, to talk about BTC, to understand the evolution that we could have in terms of this bull run, to understand the risks that we currently have structural, whether on the passage of Grayscale Capital as ETF spots, what that will imply, what is my vision in relation to that. And you will see, I think that it is something and GT. Something you have heard very little about. And that is why it is interesting to focus on this to understand the real issues of validating Grayscale Capital as an ETF. As a reminder, you always have the possibility of having free access to the educational course, which is a 60-hour training worth €400, which allows you to learn blockchain, crypto, investment, analysis technique, trading, everything to become profitable. Through 130 videos, 400 pages of guides, quizzes to find out where you are in your progress, and all for free. To have access to this lifelong training, simply use the platform of one of our partners. Everything is explained in the comments and descriptions. So, we're going to come back very quickly to what Grayscale Capital is. Grayscale Capital, GBTC, strictly speaking, is Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, in which it is a fund where BTC are stored. There are 6 lock of them. There are not only that, there are several other cryptos, and in which we have an investment fund where we cannot sell the collateral. Implied, this is the price of the share. I have a share which owns these assets, therefore which has a value linked to all of these assets, and this and GT. Share. In fact, I cannot destroy it. I cannot sell the collateral. I can only transfer this share, and it is really important because it implies that we do not have something which is flexible, something which is linked to the vagaries of the secondary market when I sell my share. So that means that the collateral, for example, drops, but if ever, for example, BTC sinks, and no one wants to buy my share of Grayscale Capital, which potentially represents a BTC with other cryptos, there are fewer people who are interested. So this implies that I will not be able to sell it at the capital price. I will have to sell it with a discount and a premium. It is important to understand this. Currently, I have already spoken to you about it, the fact that Grayscale Capital has a difference between its real price and the price of its collaterals, in which we had parts of premium and parts of discount. So part of premium, it's interesting when we take a little look here, we have the representation here of the discount, and the premium in which we had the price, the secondary price, and the premium rate, we are just going to enlarge to have a little more visibility, and GT. We see clearly that here we had an implied premium. We paid 20 more in terms of price than the price of BTC, in any case, the price of the collateral. And we see clearly that when we arrived in the maximum phase, therefore, in the phase very bullish, we started to have here no longer a premium, but an implied discount when I resold my share of GBTC. I had something which was worth less. And it is very important for 2 things. It is that one must understand here why it was a premium I and GT. Explain that to you in a few moments and understand why we switched to discount and why we are moving towards zero and the impact that will have if Grayscale ever switches to ETF. Already, what does the transition to ETF mean? The transition to an ETF means that we have a dissolution of Grayscale Capital as an existence, and we recreate it in the form of a spot ETF in which we have flexibility in the composition of the shares. This means that if I ever want, for example, to get my money back, I don't need to resell my share to someone. I can dissolve my share, and this share behind, the collateral which is represented by this share, will be sold on the market or OTC. It doesn't matter. It mainly depends on the volume and liquidity of the market, and after that I will get my money back. This is something that is different. It implies that there is no longer a need for discounts. And premium. This is why we are currently in the process of having something going back. So you say to yourself, yes, but why is he telling me this? Okay, we've already talked about it in the daily newspapers. What is the importance? We are heading towards zero because we are more and more sure that Grayscale will become an ETF, that this is rather positive. It implies that we have to have a tool of financial products accessible to everyone to being able to buy BTC is positive. Yes, I agree, except you forget why Grayscale was put together, what happened during the previous bull run, and what will happen when we move to ETF, and this is where we will take a little time. Perhaps for the newest, you don't know what Grayscale Bitcoin Trust Trade is. It's a system that was set up by Genesis Grayscale Capital, GBTC, FTX, Alameda, and a few other players, and 3C in particular, who are in it. This is something that worked very well during the bull run phase, and we can see it very clearly. This is actually the moment when we had the acquisition and GT. Really, from the number of BTC, here we can clearly see these assets which are on the total assets. We can see them very clearly here, the 6,50,000 BTC. We can clearly see that it is decreasing because these are costs that are levied. That is to say that we have a continual downward pressure. We have a little by little liquidation of BTC simply because of the operating costs, which are 2. If I am not talking nonsense at the level of GBTC, and therefore next to it we have a real acceleration which was linked to this bull run. And then you will say to yourself, yes, but as someone has already told me, I have always been told that it is normal because it was one of the only funds that existed and which could allow me to expose myself to BTC. So, yes, I completely agree. Except, in fact, that's not entirely it. When we really look at the volumes they had during this period, and it's pretty well known when we were in it, it came out more when we were in the top here. It came out here, it came out here, it came up here, it comes up regularly, but you have to understand what happened. In fact, there was a whole scheme which almost made it possible to borrow without any form of liquidation to buy. A GBTC, resell it at a premium and continue forever. And that you say to yourself, yes, I don't really understand, don't worry, we'll look. And Giet understand 2 things well already is that 1, to set up it is simple to buy a share of GBTC. I give BTC agree to Grayscale or USDT therefore. Or money, quite simply dollars who bought in BTC Grayscale behind will give me a share of agreement. This share I'm obliged to keep it for 6 months, and then I can sell this share, and this share it will sell with more. 30 of premium agree. It is the time of acceleration was the moment between 20 and 30, so in GT. That means that here I take a BTC 6 months later, I take 30 of added value compared to the price that I put, plus the valuation of the BTC. Obviously, it is the price of the current share of agreement. When we were in this phase was a bullish phase. Imagine that obviously there I had put 1,000 euros. 6 months later it was perhaps worth 1,500 plus 30 of 1,500. So it was something that was excessively profitable. And so much so that there are some, instead of relying solely on their funds, who said to themselves how I could optimize that as best as possible. How could I boost this better? If you've watched a little bit of the different videos I've made over the last 2 years, I think you already have the answer. I've already talked to you about it, and we're going to show you quite simply what was happening. And there, you will say to yourself, oh, there, what is this graph? To put it very simply, and I'll give you a summary later, DCG is the company behind Grayscale and behind Genesis, okay? The 3 are linked. And 3C, which is the huge capital fund which actually exploded with the end of Terra Luna and Celsius. But we therefore had DCG, which lent money to Genesis, therefore a company which belongs to it, to be able to lend BTC to 3C, therefore 3C, which was the capital in question, which deposited the BTC in Grayscale Trust, which have suddenly received GBTC, who had to keep them for 6 months before reselling them during this time. What were they doing? They lent Genesis the GBTCs because in 6 months they knew they could resell them with 30 plus ALU. Genesis, which is in fact the company specializing in lending, the fact of lending money, took the GBTC and lent back BTC equivalent to the amount of the GBTC that is, or lending USDT therefore directly the equivalent in cash with a delta collateralization. During this time we had Genesis which was gorging itself with the yields because it was not necessarily lent for free and GT. At 2-3 we don't necessarily have the figures, but in this case we have something that was relatively high. And there you are already saying to yourself, ooh la la, but is it normal for it to be done like that? No, it's not normal. Okay, understand that here we are making a circle which is based on the hypothesis that potentially BTC continues to grow ad vitam aeternum, and that overall I lend money on the money that I have already lent, which will perhaps be worth 30 later. Okay, that's which is happening there, if we stop there again. But no, because they did another layer again, that is, once they received the USDT, they bought BTC with it, they loaned the BTC back to GBTC for recovering GBTC, and so on, it was running smoothly. FTX did the same thing with BlockFi to be able to do the same thing with GBTC, and so we find ourselves in something that was very unhealthy, but which at the same time allowed us to have the bullish acceleration that we experienced at the BTC level. I mean, when we exactly align the notion of price with the valuation of assets, we see that the acceleration really, and we see that it stopped before the end of the top acceleration, okay? And that's where we really had the arrival of classic retail. Here, the same. and it stopped at those moments. And what is interesting to see is that all the upward acceleration was mainly driven by these purchases. And it is really very, very important, because that implies that we really have a master composition from the previous bull run, and we know that it was done like that and that it exploded in flight when 3C collapsed, when Genesis filed for bankruptcy, in which we had to go into protection. Finally, they had to go into protection, in which we were afraid that GBTC, therefore Grayscale Capital, would be dissolved by DCG being the mayor company of Grayscale Capital, in order to be able to recover the funds and to be able to repay and GT the debts, something that didn't happen. Yes, it's true that it didn't happen. On the other hand, it's not that simple, because in this case, DCG had an agreement with Genesis, which itself is in confrontation with Gemini because Genesis was lending to all the different players. Loan to Gemini, loan to Celsius, so imagine what happened. So here, what I am explaining to you is what happened at the time of the bursting of the bubble, at the time of Terra Luna, which in fact led to a total bursting of the overexposure of the various funds to these levers too. And it's important to understand what happened. Why? Because it hasn't ended yet. That means that right now we're still in Bisbee. We are still on the same page between Genesis and Gemini. We see that now it is Genesis which is attacking Gemini for 650 million or 680 million, I don't know anymore, which have been withdrawn because in fact there are still several billion which have not been settled. And DCG is currently heavily impacted by Genesis. Currently is really in a critical situation. Understand that it's not just the fact of owing money to Gemini, it's not just that, it's that behind it there is the SEC which is going after Genesis from Gemini and certainly also from Grayscale Capital. This is one of the reasons why they did not want to validate the ETFs at all. The validation of the transformation of Grayscale Capital into an ETF. It is not because it is BTC, I think that plays a role, yes. But it's mainly because it's Grayscale, and behind them, they had a vocation to tackle Genesis Gemini, and the fact of switching to ETF allows. And that's where you understand everything that is happening. Pass. I will prove to you other things aside. It is that the fact of switching to an ETF will allow the different investors to be able to release their BTC, their collateral, by making a redemption, a recovery of their share, and therefore the share will disappear. The collaterals will be sold to be able to recover the money. And that is very important. It implies that we are going to have a liberation from the circle that I presented to you, from this circle, because there are still a lot of levers. There are a lot of people which during this period had shares and still have very high shares because we had the possibility of having a premium which transformed into a discount. So imagine that I bought relatively expensive BTC that I placed, thinking of having a premium perhaps of 30, 25, 20, and I end up with a discount of 20. So that means that I lost 50 of the value of what I deposited without counting the loss of value of the BTC itself. And that means I'm at a huge loss. And the only way to recover that is to blow up the notion of funds and return to a notion of ETF where I have the real value of the cost of the ETF. And so that means that I have the real value of the components, and on that we are going to ask the question, okay, but what is the hook point, which means that people have returned to zero, or in any case have returned to their feet and did not lose money on it. Unfortunately, it is not necessarily a day, but it gives us a good vision of the average purchase price of the different GBTC holders. On that note, we obviously have ARK Invest. We are going to have ARK again a second time. There is a shortage, unfortunately. We do not have this information, but we see that the average prices are between $41 and $39, approximately between $39 and $40 on average prices. And when we look at the price of GBTC, we're slowly moving towards these zones, which represent the 42,000 here at roughly the level of BTC. And understand that here, it is the actors who manipulated the last bull run. Understand that this is what led to a very strong acceleration in BTC and which gave the dynamic of the bull run. This is no longer possible, okay? These actors, who are still ultra-averaged, at least those who remain, who still owe a lot of money, I think of Genesis, I think of DCG, they managed to delay. But a year ago, in January, following the fall of FTX, I told you that it was really complicated at the level of DCG. I didn't really think that they were going to dissolve DCG. For me, I told you that it was not the case, But on the other hand, they were going to move towards the passage in ETF because for them, it is the best deal that can happen in which they can release part of the collateral to sell it. And I think they are not the only ones. And so the question I ask you is, according to you, the upward acceleration that we are experiencing recently, is it not also a means of valuing GBTC shares in preparation for a potential release to return to average prices that are consistent? And here I really want you to take the time to think. I really want you to ask yourself, think, is this totally inconsistent? What gave rise to the acceleration of BTC that we have seen recently? We're going to start again with this graph. Who gave this candle to and this candle to? False rumors. On validation, ETFs. Once again, false rumors. We know that it will be validated. However, we have an upward acceleration which is taking place based on an estimate of the validation date. Are we not really in something that we already experienced during the previous cycle? I wanted to tell you, yes, we are clearly preparing for that, and that is the vision that I currently have. So I'm very far from being a bear in relation to that. It's just a reflection on what happened in the previous cycle, on what I know in general about the manipulation that there is around BTC. So in general, of what is happening at the level of Binance, I do not think that Binance is the trigger. Although it is something which will be very complicated later, I will explain to you at the end of this video why. I made the video for you on Binance, yesterday's video, so don't hesitate to go watch it. For me, we are really in a classic of market manipulation in which we should not have such a strong acceleration on the possibility of a rumor in an ecosystem which is still greatly under pressure because the SEC is on the heels of big players, that Binance took a big beating, and yet we still have a price that is growing. And there, the question and the reason, in fact, for me, is here at the level of Grayscale, at the level of 6 lock BTC. I don't think there will be everything, but I really think we will have surprises regarding the validation of Grayscale. Once it is validated, I think that we will necessarily have deals that will be carried out to free up capital to be able to reinvest or start again on other deals. It is certain that on this point, contrary to what we think at the level of BlackRock has done a pre-unding, that is one thing. BlackRock will have to finance its BTC to be able to have new clients. But on the other hand, Grayscale already has the BTC, already has 6 lock BTC. It's not nothing. It's something that weighs especially on the degree of market liquidity. Don't forget the quality of liquidity. Liquidity quality, for those who don't know, what is it? This is the number of BTC that are available on exchanges for trading, meaning how many BTC or lower unit of BTC there are to trade. The order books are excessively empty, which means that each movement can be relatively strong. And that's why you have to go relatively high. It's easy to manipulate the price to make it rise, and that's one of the reasons why you have to be very careful. Because currently we don't have any liquidity injection, that's why I'm being very careful about what's happening. We have a very good upward flow and we have to take advantage of it. On the other hand, we must consider that we are indeed in a bullish flow here. We can clearly see that it is a very, very nice bullish flow, but that it remains only influenced for the moment, and that it will remain until that we have validation, which will be done with injections of external liquidity. As long as we do not also have the end of the rumor, and therefore the validation of the different ETFs, we will not have this answer. We will not have, is it really a buy the rumor, sell the news? Is there any point in having a sell the news? I want to tell you, GBTC has every interest in selling the news, and that's why we'll have to be very careful. For me, the start of the bull run is still too far away. We will have lateralization phases, breathing phases. That does not mean that we will arrive at 10-0, that we will retest the 15-0, that we will retesting the 25-0, just means that at some point we will have a retracement which will be more or less important depending on the quality of the market, the quality of the liquids at that time. And we will decide how far we will go depending on the order flow at the time it happens. We are not in a crystal ball. We are just prepared for different eventualities. And I'm not at all. And that makes me laugh a lot. Because, for example, we have DiCapo. For those who don't know, DiCapo, he's someone on Twitter who is relatively well known. 7 lakh subscribers on Twitter. But which is excessively bearish. He's really someone who is deeply bear, who, for him, his target is 12-0 and it remains 12-0. And for him, he doesn't see anything other than 12-0. And so, As soon as we arrive in a piece of news which is relatively bearish in quotes, he says that's it. It's the moment we're going to arrive at 12-0. So generally when he starts talking again, it's the moment where we do a pump. That's pretty much it. So for me, it makes me laugh a lot when I see that, but understand in GT. Although indeed Binance is bad news for cryptos, but on the other hand, it does not mean that we are going to sink now. It is two separate things. It is something which will happen in the long term. And that's why I want to end with this vision for me of what is happening with Binance compared to what will happen in the short term, regardless of the validation of the ETFs. It remains in fact something that is short term. The long term for me is the next cycle. It's what will happen following the next cycle. And for me, what has the most impact is what happened with Binance, because this implies that crypto regulation is going to be very, very complicated. It means that the crypto revolution is going to be very complicated in the regulatory framework, which is imposed by the Department of Justice on what they carried out at Binance, on what will happen at the SEC level. I think we will have and GT. Big files that are going to arrive, so we are going to have regulatory pressure that is going to be colossal, and I am not sure that we will have as much freedom as during the previous bull run, as many altcoins which will compete for so many projects which, based on wind or pure speculation, are going to be fought out, so that implies that it is possible for me to have a bull run, which will be totally different, and I would really like to end on that, and that is only for me my vision, and the more we advance, the more I tell myself that this is likely to be the case, that we could find ourselves in a bull run, which is not really a bull run, but rather a long-term bull run, because generally what is bull run considered by a very impulsive, very, very strong acceleration over a very short period, and then we start again, okay? And there, for me, it could be a bull run, which could be a little different, with a little less speculation, and therefore also behind retracements. Much less strong, but accelerations much less strong too. For me, we would have something that would perhaps be more structured in this style with accelerations and structures of this style, and which would perhaps last longer. So there we would perhaps have the end of a cycle really linked to the halving. Therefore, a 4-year cycle in which we begin to have signs which are rather positive at the level of BTC because we have transaction costs which begin to increase, and which perhaps following the halving will exceed what miners receive in reward at the level of BTC, mainly on projects which could be built around Bitcoin, as we are starting to see, and therefore create a monetary flow around BTC and behind altcoins which would follow, but which would not be as speculative or in any case much less speculative or perhaps more complicated to access. That's also what maybe decentralized finance will become available. It will be more on exchanges where we can really trade small altcoins. It will be on specific decentralized exchanges. There will perhaps be something different that will structure itself above, or a narrative which will take precedence and which will not be a narrative linked to altcoin projects, therefore, in which we really have 100 pure speculation. We will really have massive adoption projects. And that is what I really hope, that we are in this type of cycle, in which we take more time to be able to build for longer and no longer have bear markets as we have known now, as we have known FTX, as we were able to know with Genesis, as we were able to know it with Celsius. It's really, really important for just crypto in general, blockchain technology, and what's going to happen afterwards. In any case, the important thing is to be ready for all eventualities, and for that you need to have as much information as possible, and that's what I've been trying to bring you for the last 2 years. And yes, it's been 2 years. Don't forget that we see each other again at 20 for a live in which we will discuss. We will talk. You will ask me your questions. I will offer you particular visions, whether on the bull run, on profit-taking, on analyses. In any case, it's live on YouTube at 20, and I'll see you later.